Okay, here we are again. So I think that I have my microphone issue resolved well enough for this. I want to test out my audio equipment by going over an older piece. It's rather perfunctory, but very important for many peoples of European descent who find themselves in a very difficult predicament because Christianity is taken for granted as our moral order, and it's presented as if that is synonymous with morals, and there's no really alternative. You're either amoral, some sort of atheist amoral, or you're Christian. And if you were raised Catholic, as I was, and you got away from it, only to find yourself stressed out, as I did, for example, by university requirements and so on, and the disordered circumstance of a city like Boston. You are looking for some moral bearings, and you don't know what else to go back to but the Christianity. You don't have, particularly in the Catholic tradition, you're not shown Kant, and Kant turned out to be, for me anyway, a helpful instrument. His moral system turned out to be a helpful instrument to segue away from Christianity and to begin to explore the grounds of new moral orders that must be negotiated between people, because morals don't come from God, they are negotiated between people as a matter of practicality to begin with, and things that are more important for our survival are going to be taken for granted. But whatever culture and people that you're among, whether it's your own or another, there's always going to be some things that are prohibited. There's always going to be some things that are obligatory, and there's always going to be some things that are legitimate. You might do them or you might not do them at your discretion. But there's no rising above morals and getting by, at least not for long, with an amoral disposition. Okay, so having said that, and for those of you who found themselves in circumstances like mine where they tried Christianity but found it insufficient to negotiate the reality of contemporary life, and yet recognize that trying to shun aside moral concerns is not the answer either. This might help you. So let me get back to this text. And I'll start here. While people who are earnestly attempting to practice Christianity may hate to hear talk of its sincere pursuit called a phase describes well enough that period of time when I stubbornly attempted to assert belief over and against any evidence to the contrary. To begin, I visited a few evangelical and fundamentalist churches, and I felt a bit foolish. Nevertheless, some things that were happening and foreboding, the imposition of the ominous demographic makeup and rule structure of America, were so horrible in implication for what I held most precious that I almost had to believe that Christianity was important to assert. The torture of all that mattered to me was near pervasive and only promised to get worse. I needed something to transcend that, some kind of consensus with people over the things that I cared about. Things should have been better, clearly. So I pressed on with my personal evangelizing. for and of the true Christianity, making a fool of myself. I would be more embarrassed if I did not look back in empathy and realize that I could not simply shrug off 2,000 years of European tradition, all the sacrifice, all the devotion, as if it were nothing, and if I did not know that I was trying to do the right thing. As are you, those Christians out there who might be listening to this. I'm not trying to flout you or say that you're stupid or anything like that. You're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to invoke a moral order, and you recognize that a moral order is essential, it's imperative. However, in a lecture I attended, Professor Ram Hare, recently departed, of Oxford, discussed morals with utmost sincerity. I was able to understand for myself that morals are indeed as important as anything in the world, with the possible exception of concerns for survival, though the two concerns are probably not mutually exclusive. Again, morals are a matter of practicality, and I think that that's why Kant named his moral tome pragmatics. Hare added that people need moral orders. Moral orders. The plurality of the term was a large clue in my liberation from mere tradition, custom, and habit. It meant that there were different moral systems, and one might seek out one that serves the kind of people and personal interests that one hopes to realize. Ultimately, I would look forward to a moral order that would circumscribe and serve the interests of people of indigenous European descent. However, prior to that was another crucial step in liberating me from the customs and habits of traditional religion. The moral system of a Christian thinker, Immanuel Kant. It provided, in all honesty, a more clear, sensible, fair, and intelligible rationale than what I had read in the Christian text, but one that did not in all ways correspond with what was in the Christian text. Since it helped me, I am hopeful that it will help others in taking a step to a moral order more conducive to their own interests as whites, while not necessitating mistreatment of outgroups either. Now, do not beat me up if you are largely familiar with this, or because Kant was talking about those universalistic terms, in those universalistic terms. First things first, all thinkers have to take Kant into account. I have updated his system with the contemporary philosophical considerations of coherence, accountability, agency, and warrant. I will move towards more specifically native European interests in subsequent discussions. Further notes of semi-interest, when not obsequiously holding the door open for the late Kara and Kennedy after theory of Soviet foreign policy class at Tufts, I took religion classes as something I might cope with, if nothing else, including a class in critical Bible study, which I'd taken expecting my earnestness to be reinforced, not contradicted. However, the obvious man-madeness of the Bible became apparent. For example, the Revelation had to have had at least 4 different authors. The contrivance of the genealogy from David to Jesus was apparent as well. There are sundry other examples of obvious human fabrication in the texts, i.e., definitely not the hand of God. One of my religion professors was not especially patient with my phase. He asked me flippantly, "Did you read all of the Kant?" He was talking about, he assigned the article what is called, what is enlightenment? It's a little article at the end of this book. I answered no, only that last chapter you'd assigned on religious intolerance being the greatest ignorance. He grunted and dismissed me in frustration. But you see, at that point, I did not want to hear that my devotion could be considered ignorant, because I was well-meaning indeed. Maybe with a little more patience, I'd have come back to it sooner. I cannot say that I didn't try, though, as some things were shining in that Kant. So, what did I do? I went to the library, looked at it again, and realizing that it was something I'd need, in my rash state of mind, I attempted to steal the book. Electronic door security detectors sensors were a new technology then, and the buzzer caught me. How embarrassing. And ironic, as it is the one book that will tell you that you should never steal. It was not until 5 years later that I picked up the book again. It helped greatly to alleviate some of the worst anguish of mine. So if you have not read it already, I can save you some time and anguish, having put it here and updated in capsule form. Kant's moral system as coherence, accountability, agency, and warrant. It is vogue nowadays to deride Immanuel Kant as the quintessential universalizer, now that 20th century science, mathematics, and philosophy have sufficiently disproved what Kant considered to be the imperative foundation of universal principles, always good for all people in all circumstances. The disproving of Kant's quest does not, however, eliminate the usefulness of his system as a practical topoi, or framework in simpler English. Here is a practical update of this framework using the contemporary philosophical concerns of coherence, accountability, agency, and warrant. Principles versus sensibilities. Principles are guidelines and ideal rules which persons maintain to give them character and coherence. Coherence is the first task of any individual in the world. It means to make sense of things in a consistent manner. In following up on principles set forth, you may be accountable, that is, able to provide explanations of your actions for responsible defensive reasons, and you may establish warrant, the credibility for proactive endeavor. If your actions are misunderstood or worse, false or negative accusations are made against you, then you can refer back to the principles that you are following and be sure of yourself. Kant calls this being sure of yourself freedom. As such, you are freed from arbitrariness, the confusion of natural flux, false and negative accusations, trivialities, and, of a special importance, freed from natural inclinations which may pull you in a negative direction. Finally, in that regard, as has been pointed out since Kant's time, for example by Ram Hooray in Personal Conversation, in referring back to these principles you've set forth, you can establish yourself agency, proving that you are the causal agent of your actions. Now, if you get carried away with your principles, which is called over-speculation, when it comes to the point where you are not dealing with sensible reality, you can always refer back to sensible evidences. However, as it is easier to attend to sensible evidences than it is to abide by principles and restore credibility in an unkept principle, it's better to err in the direction of principles. The most fundamental principle, unanimity, means to think in agreement with yourself. For example, if you come to a conflict, you should think first of why your actions and words might be correct, not why they might be wrong. Coherence, accountability, agency, and agents are begun in this principle straight away. Now, note this, the most fundamental principle, and how different it is from what you're taught in Christianity and the Golden Rule in particular. Kant considers the most fundamental principle, unanimity, means to think in agreement with yourself. Okay, you're not going to find that in the Christian text. Okay, 2. Common morals, A, common morals, B, popular philosophy, and C, principled philosophy. So Kant is starting off with the common morals that we all find ourselves in, and then we get diverted by principled philosophy, and so he wants to re-anchor it on principled philosophy. So anyway, A, common morals. As a matter of practical convenience, people usually start out accepting implicitly first principles. E.g., don't steal, don't lie, be monogamous. Common moral ideas that it's worthwhile to be good, fair, and decent. Then a myriad of and pervasive influences tend to divert people from first principles. That Kant calls popular philosophy. It is ubiquitous. People will cite many excuses for deviating from common morals, from the first principles. Typical of these excuses is the statement, everybody does it. But the mere popularity of a notion, Kant would observe, does not provide an excuse to violate first principles. Consensus can be wrong. Beyond mere conformity to popular consensus, however, there are more cynical and even less accountable deviations from first principles. 2, perhaps most venal is the claim of scientific objectivity. which disingenuously denies accountability for the personal choices of its practitioners and its subjects, e.g., that's just human nature. As encapsulated in that phrase, it's just human nature. 3, people will cite religion even, as in the statement, it's just God's will. 4, or people may claim that the complex relativity of their existential situation could not allow them to act in accordance with first principles, when in fact they could have. 5, finally, there is the practice of didactically reversing a first principle, as in teaching through reverse psychology, under the rubric of, quote, teaching, exemplified in the statement, it was really for your own good. In any case, their arguments for breaking with common morals are of 2 kinds. That's just the objective way it is, or that's just their, quote, relative circumstances. Inasmuch, for the brevity of their personal accountability, that's just, they are not well warranted, and typically not, in their assertions. C, principled philosophies. To correct the negative effects of popular consensus, Kant would offer that we reestablish our first principles on a priori, i.e. transcendent universal foundation. Accordingly, we must test our principles by asking the universal question of them. Can this principle always be good for everyone? In practice, that means treating people as ends in themselves. That would be in contrast to treating people as the mere means through which other things pass, as strict attendance to logics of nature, otherworldly ideas, or technology would have it. That's a Tillich's insight. Kant calls this the most important principle, goodwill, that is, treating people as ends in themselves. Without it, intelligence, beauty, strength, power, and fortune only make a person more terrible. Despite this fine reasoning, it's true enough that Kant has been solidly refuted in seeking universal foundations. Heidegger pointed out that he was still a Cartesian, and I'll talk about that later. I have already. Nevertheless, as a practical outline, it is brilliant of itself, and a practical use as a criteria toward achieving coherence, accountability, and establishing warrant, all 3 necessary to establish individuality and agency in the confusing flux of contemporary society. Part of what Kant tried and failed to do with his proposed a priori realm transcendent of nature and establishing universal foundations was an attempt to save the world from the arbitrary flux of empirical philosophy, arbitrary upshot. And this is still one of our major problems as European peoples. The empiricism of Kant's predecessor, John Locke, held a prejudice against social classifications. Locke treated social classifications as fictions of the mind, which should give way to empirically based sensory impressions of individuals, a notion that was canonized as civil individual rights in the U.S. Constitution. This sanctified rupturing of group classification and responsibility. Now then, again, this Kant, Locke, and Descartes are at the apex of the Enlightenment and the onset of modernity. And the critics of modernity have had to wrestle with this, with Kant and this Cartesianism. And the postmodern hermeneutic turn is what is the method used along with social constructionism to take us back into the realm of the social world, into reality, that is, where morals and moral orders are negotiated necessarily. We have to have a moral order. And Christianity doesn't suffice in the eyes of most of us. But we can use the hermeneutic turn to take us back into what Aristotle called praxis, the social world, in order to negotiate these very important matters. There's quite a task ahead of us, and I really, I'm not at all mocking Christians. Again, this is what we were given. This is what we're told is the moral order, and the rebellion against it into it. Immorality is obviously not the thing to do either. So we've got to take it upon ourselves, difficult and daunting as it is, to negotiate our moral order anew. And the most important things eventually will be taken for granted and become like second nature, and be understood as moral very readily. Okay. Where are we? Let me see. Is the YouTube is still playing? It should be. I don't see it. Anyway. Okay, I'll end it there and see how this, if it sounds any better.